We are starting to record.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. So welcome everybody to Hack.py part 3. Today we'll be going over web development with Python, and specifically this is going to be taught by Paul and Henry. So that's them in the webcams, and so I am going to hide my webcam, so they'll be taking care of the rest. But yeah, go for it, you two.
All right. So welcome guys to Python Web Development Part 1. So I'm Henry. This is
I'm Paul.
Paul. Yeah. And so yeah, we're just going to be going over web development in Python using Flask. So the resources for this workshop are posted at acmurl.com/hackpy3. Those are the slides. And the GitHub repo is at acmurl.com/hackpy. But so from last time, the last workshop last week, we basically did an overview of different Python features available to us. So we went over functions, which are basically required to have an input and output. We went over classes and objects in Python, which are basically ways to hold data and perform operations. They form the basis for object-oriented programming. We also went over data structures. So we went over how they're basically like collections of data that you can also perform different operations on. And some of them have like unique properties and stuff. And lastly, we also went over how to import modules in Python. So this is how you access other files and other functions not currently available to you, but then you can import them into your files. Yeah. So first, we have functions in Python. So as I mentioned before, functions are required to have an input and an output in the form of function parameters and then whatever the function executes in their block. So here we have two functions called myFunction and another function. So what myFunction does, it takes in a last name and a kid, and it prints out his last name is whatever the last name you input, as well as and his kid is named kid. And so what this function does, if we call it using the arguments Jackson and Michael, it's basically going to print out his last name is Jackson and his kid is named Michael. So our other function we have here is called another func, and it takes in two parameters, A and B, and it basically returns a check to see whether or not A equals B. And so if we call this function with the arguments 4 and 8, this will check to see that 4 is equal to 8, which it isn't, so it prints out false. So that's functions. Then we talked about classes and objects. So here we have an animal class as well as a dog subclass. So here the animal class, we construct it using a name and an age. So whenever we create a new animal, we pass in some sort of name and some sort of age that gets stored into the name and age properties. We also defined a method in animal called speak. And this, we don't really call it with any arguments. All it does is it prints out I am whatever the name is, and then I am age years old. Here we have our dog class, which extends the animal class. So treat dog as a subclass of animal. So because it's a subclass of animal, we can call the super constructor, which means that for here, the init method will call the animal init method. So we just pass in a name and age as usual, and then it'll create a dog object. Here we have another speak method, which actually overrides the animal speak method. So instead of printing like I am name and I am age years old, it'll actually just print out bark. So as an example, here we create a new dog called Ted with an age of 4. And then when we print out speak, instead of printing I am Ted and I am 4 years old, it'll print out bark. And then, so we have data structures. And so last workshop, we went over dictionaries, sets, and lists. So just as a refresher, dictionaries are unordered key and value pairs, which means that you can use the key to access whatever value you have at that key. And because of this, because you can access different values at a singular key, you can't have duplicate keys. For sets, they're unordered as well, and they're basically just a collection of unique values. So you can't have, say, like A, B, B, C. You can only have A, B, and C. Lists are kind of like the complement of sets basically they're ordered, which means they have indexes, and they're a collection of possibly duplicate values. So you can basically think of lists as sort of the arrays that you would find in like Java. And lastly, last workshop we learned how to import modules. So say you wanted to import something like time or like a time function, you would have to import that into your file. So here you would import a module, and then from there you're able to access all the variables within module as well as all the functions within module. So here you can print out module.var, which is a variable in module, and you can also call a function in module, like module.function. There are other tricks you can do with importing. So from here, you can specifically import just a function. Because of this, you can call the function within your file, but you can't print out any of the variables in module because you haven't imported those. And another trick that you can do is you can actually simplify what you import into a variable name. So here we simplify module as md. So here we can call function using md as well as print out var, like md.var. So now that we've covered everything as a review from last workshop, we're going to be moving on to more stuff that we're going to be going over during this workshop, which is web development. So the first thing that we have to do when talking about web development is we have to talk about HTML. So what is HTML? HTML is hypertext markup language. This is basically what we use to build our web pages. So these consist of items called tags that create the elements that you see on a web page, like text or pictures. And usually HTML is located in a file called index.html. You can treat it as like a main.py file for like Python programs. But this isn't always the case. You can have HTML and other files. We'll be taking a look later on at how you use HTML to create templates for your web pages. And yeah. So in terms of HTML tags and elements, like I said before, tags are what you use to create the different elements of a web page, such as the text, headers, and images. Different elements have different properties and features to them. So like a header will be like bigger text, while an image would like be an image that you can change like the width and the height of it. Elements in HTML usually have a start tag and an end tag. So here we have an example of a paragraph element. So tags always are wrapped in triangle brackets, like so. And when you end the tag, you have to make sure that you end it with a forward slash, like this. And so another thing about elements is that there's a difference between inline and block elements. So block elements are kind of like how they sound. They're basically in a block format that start on a new line and basically extend the entire width of the page by default. While inline elements, they are on the same line and they only take up as much width as necessary. So here are some common HTML tags. So we have div, which is basically like a division, and it's basically used as a container for children elements. And they're very versatile because you don't necessarily, they're very like flexible in what you can do with them. You can assign like different features to them, different attributes. H1 and H2, those are your header elements that have like different sizes. You have your paragraph element, which is used for like basic text blocks, all that stuff. You have A, which is your anchor element. This is what you use to create like links to other web pages or locations on page. So we have a question by Matei. How do you center a div? So we'll be getting into like styling and stuff later, I promise. We'll get to that. So continuing on, we also have image elements. So these like display an image on the web page. You have span, which is basically used to insert inline elements like on the same line as other like elements. So you can have it like in between like text object or text elements. And you also have like UL and LI, which is used to create lists of items, which if you've ever had like a bullet point list, you could create it using like UL and LI. And so, yeah. So this is what a sample index.html file looks like. It's kind of small, but yes, I can. Cool. Anyways, yeah, so this is what a sample index.html file looks like. What you need to know about this is that you don't really need to know like the specifics of what this does, but all you should be really focusing on is like the different tags that you see. So you notice that for most of these tags, each tag has a start tag, like here, HTML, and an end tag at the bottom, like /HTML. So for any like HTML file, or I guess more specifically for an index.html file, you want to make sure that you put the exclamation point doc type HTML to signify that that document type is HTML. And then you have like your HTML and your closing HTML tags, which basically says that anything within those tags is going to be treated as HTML. So here you have what's a comment looks like in HTML. You have your different elements. You have a link to a style sheet that we'll be getting into later on. And yeah, you just have different elements that you can nest within elements. And yeah, any questions so far? All right. Moving on. So yeah, now that we talked about HTML, we're going to get into the real like meat of this workshop, which is using Flask and another thing called Jinja. So what is Flask? So Flask is what we'll be using to actually create our web pages. Flask is known as a micro web framework, and what that is, it basically makes it easier to create web pages via Python. And so Flask helps a lot with handling different web requests, which is basically communicating data between the server and the client. Flask is really lightweight, so it doesn't use a lot of resources and it doesn't take up a lot of space or memory. And it also helps with creating a REST API, which stands for Representational State Transfer. Basically, what you need to know about that is that a REST API is sort of like a model of a backend server and a front-end client. And so, but how are we going to use Flask to create web pages if it's like basically Python? So that's where Jinja comes in, and Paul is going to take over for that.
Okay, so yeah, Jinja is basically like a web templating engine for Flask. So what it does is it actually takes in a HTML-like template, which also includes some of the functions that are in the Flask file. Python file, and basically inserts computed values into the HTML file. And after that, it will just render it using a function in a something called route handler in Flask. It is very flexible since basically you can like put any type of value into HTML. You can like kind of re-render it in real time to like reflect the updated value. Okay, so now we're gonna get into some details about Jinja. So first of all, when you try to render a template using Jinja, we had to define a route in Flask. So what a route does is it basically takes the URL of the site, and then like if you do like /hello, it will go to this function, and this function basically has a default name of none. So the name field here takes none, and when you call the render template, it takes this hello.html as defined here, and it checks if name exists. Okay, so in this case, if it's only like /hello, the name does not exist, so it will render the HTML tag hello world. But let's say if you want to like have a custom name, so if you call hello on the name, then name here will be replaced by whatever value is in that route. And right here, since the name exists, it will print hello, whatever name it is. So that's how to handle if-else statements in Flask. So now we're going to get into the render template method and how it's done. So basically, the render template method generates the full page output by rendering the template with input variables. And the render method is called automatically when we call the render template method from Flask. Okay, so what do you guys think if you replace the name right here with Steve? What do you think will print? Okay, so if you insert the name Steve here, it will basically output this HTML file with the name here replaced by Steve. Yeah, so let's move on to the next slide. So next we have control flow and function calling in Flask, and render it using Jinja. Oh, so by the way, the reason why we're allowed to have like if else statements in Flask is because it's not actually like rendering a real HTML. It's basically taking the HTML and like basically pre-process it and like outputs it the result of the template. Okay, so yeah, speaking of control flow, we can also have like a for loop that iterates through a variable that's passed into the render template function. So what this does is basically just a for loop like in any language. So for person and people, so the people array is here. The people array is basically an array of objects with the name of different people. So for each of the person, you render a div with a paragraph and with a specific person's name, and it says hello. So if you actually run this, it will say Henry says hello, Paul says hello, and Daniel says hello. Okay, so we also have something that's really nice in Flask called template inheritance. So what template inheritance does is it basically, you can basically define like a base template where you can like build off of, and then like if you want like specific things that are different for each of the web pages, you can just have like a child template that goes off from the base template. So in this case, it will inherit the style sheet, and it will insert another style which defines the class importance color to be this value. And it also inserts the value index into the block here, so the title will now become index. And for the content, the block right here, it will insert h1, so the header becomes index, and like the paragraph is welcome to my awesome homepage. Okay, so now we're gonna do more of the styling part of the Jinja rendering. So we're now gonna talk about CSS. It's basically used all across the web to style different elements on HTML files. So you can assign properties to each of the elements, or like elements selected by a certain CSS class or ID. So that's why it's good for styling groups of elements together. Okay, so how do we style the web page? First, we have to actually import a style sheet. Well, you can also like do inline styles, but like that's not really a preferred way of doing it. So for example, you have like a styles property in the div tag, and then like you can define the styles there. But like in general, like, for group practices, we should define a style sheet called main.css or anything that you like to name it. And we have to place it in the head element of our HTML file. And then in each of the elements around style, we can like define a class for it. So classes, basically, you can have like a single class be applied to multiple elements, but then ID is there's only like one ID in the entire HTML file. So like for example, if you are trying to like style the title, then we just select the ID title and just set text size to 1.5 EM. And then you can do the styling. If it's a class, then you can use a dot to select the class. And if it's a tag, then you can just write the tag and like put properties in it. Okay, so if you want to learn more about just HTML CSS, you can go to this link, which contains our workshops for the past from the past quarter. I believe you have to go into the front-end dev workshop in order to see it, but yeah. Okay, now, so apart from CSS, we can also import static JavaScript files into Flask. So, for example, we have a JavaScript program called Cruel Scripts, which changes the web page every 5 seconds. We can have the script be placed in the static folder in our project, basically like the same folder as a website, but it's a subfolder called static. And we can add a line, preferably at the end of the body, to do some action. Since at the end of the body, like we're able to like render all the HTML tags already, so calling the JavaScript file won't cause the error. But if you place it like somewhere in the head or like early on in the body, it might cause you an error. Okay, so yeah, if you restart the web page, then JavaScript is applied. Okay, so that's it for like the content for this workshop. But like for the next workshop, we also have HTTP requests, which we'll go briefly over this workshop. So what HTTP is a network transfer protocol that allows users to like transfer data between the client and the backend server. And there are several main types of HTTP requests that you can do, and they're defined by different methods. So the first method is called GET. So GET is the most commonly used method in HTTP. It allows you to basically just get the content and not modify anything. It's considered a safe method since it does not modify anything in the backend, and it's also used to get basically all the web page content that you see on the web. So basically, whenever you visit a web page, it's basically a GET HTTP request. But you can also have a GET request that goes to the API and gets you a JSON response. So POST is generally used to modify or like actually put in content into the backend server. So like for example, if you want to like make a new user, then you use a POST request. You send a POST request to the server. The PUT request is generally used to modify data, but generally we should not mix POST and PUT together since PUT is ignored when you send a POST request at the same time. And delete is basically what you use to delete the data. So next time we'll be focusing mostly on just GET requests. All right, so now let's get into the actual coding of the workshop. All right, Henry, can you pull up the Replit?
Yeah. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah.
Ooh, cool. Persian. Nice. All right. So, yeah. FYI, I'm not going to be able to see the chat. I'll try to refer back to it as much as I can, but in the case not, yeah. So here. All right, so Paul, do you want to start with the base.html?
Yeah, let's start coding the base.html. So first of all, this is like a very simple HTML site, and we actually want to add more to it right now. So what do you do? First of all, we need to like somehow style the web page. So we actually need to import link. Basically, link is a link to the style sheet, and the real is, since we need title to be a style sheet, then we style sheet here. Now we have the reference to the location of the style sheet. So in Flask, you extract the value of the location by using double parentheses and URL for. So for URL for, you define it to be a static file. And then you basically type in the file name, which in this case is under the static folder, which is style.css. So style.css. And then now we can kind of modify the CSS. Some connection issue. Okay, so now we have the CSS connected. Wait, Henry, do you see like the styles folder?
You have to create it.
Okay. Okay, so now, yeah, so like we create a static folder actually. Yeah, so all CSS and JavaScript files go under this folder. And now we can do just, since we defined the file, it needs to be style.css, so that's why I'm going to name it. And for style.css, we can apply some very basic styles to it. So, for example, we can set the font to a font that we actually want. So, font family, we set that to be some random font. Like, let's see how this turns out. So now, let me reload it. Okay, so you can see here that the CSS does not have any effect on the web page. This because our website actually caches the CSS file onto its history. It's because all GET requests are cached by the browser by default. So what we need to do is we need to like apply some like hacky way to just make the CSS update. Okay, so for in the main site.py file, I'm gonna import datetime, import datetime. So, but this way, we have a different URL each time you render, so the CSS actually updates. So now we have the datetime object passed in. What you can do here is go to base.html, q equals to, and then we can specify datetime.now to modify the URL so that it's different for each time you access it. And then now if we restart, okay, so now you see the font is like, it has changed. So that's a good sign. That means the CSS has been applied. Okay, so now that we have the CSS going for us, we're gonna try to see how templating works. So let's create another file called template.html. And in template.html, we're gonna do something that inherits from base.html. So how we do that is we basically do, we have a block here that extends base.html. And then we also want to basically apply some modifications here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a block here, define a block here. Basically, that's where the template inserts content. So block let's call it body, and then so what this is it takes whatever is in the block in template.html and places it in base.html. So right here, we also have a block. So first of all, we want to render a table so we can actually create our to-do list app. So we have a table tag, and a table tag, we have a table row. And inside table row, we first have to put our headers in the first row. So for to-do list, the first header is the item, so like what kind of item it is. The second header, we have the description, or like actually type what the to-do list, so like the type of task it is. Thirdly, we have the description. So now we have the table with the table row and a table description. Let's try re-rendering it and replacing this with template.html and see if it works. Okay, so now we have the item, the type, and the description rendered here. So now this is just a very basic part of it. What if we want to place items, actually like place our to-do list items inside this table row? Okay, so we're gonna have to first define array object, which the list object, which allows you to store the to-do list items in memory. So in the main set.py file, I'm gonna define a variable called to-do list, which is an array or a list in Python. So what we do here is we pass in another param called to-do list, which also equals to to-do list. So this is basically the first to-do list is basically like how it's gonna be named inside the template file, and this is the naming of the object itself. Okay, so now we have an empty array. We need to like create a sample object that we got tested against. So we have an item. Let's say the item is like some random character, and then we have the type as also some random thing. And then we now have the description, which is also just anything it can be. And now restore it. Okay, so now we have this sample array. We can use this array to render stuff. So another row. So for the next few rows, we're gonna render stuff. So instead of manually creating each table row, we're using the for loop functionality in Jinja, which allows us to iterate through each of the items in the to-do list. So that's how you write a for loop. And okay, so now we a table row. But instead, this time what we're gonna do is we got to do table itself, and for that we're gonna put in some custom content such as item.type, item.item. Then we have item.type. Item.description. And if we render this right now, it should give us one item with a to-do list. So let's see if it actually works. So as you can see here, now the to-do list contains that one item from that list and actually renders it. Okay, so this list doesn't look quite nice right now, so I'm gonna apply some styling to it. So let's set the to-do list. So table, we're gonna set that width to 100% of the page width. Okay, so now it's more spread out. You can actually style it a bit further. You can place a border around the table. So border style. And solid. Okay, so now we have a solid border. You can also style, so select the table row or the table cell itself. So let's do table header, and then also set the border style to, so this time it's gonna be dashed, and we're gonna set the color to red. Okay, so now we have a styled header. You're just gonna style themselves. So border style. Do dot it this time, and then some darker green. Okay, so so now we have the basic to-do list. Henry's gonna take over for the forms themselves.
So right now we have our to-do list, and we have one item in the list. Now this is kind of difficult to add items to the list because that means we actually have to change the code and like add another item to it. So what we want to do is we want to add a way so that we can actually input the items ourselves and like add it and remove it as we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file called forms.py. So I'm going to do new file. I'm going to call it forms.py. And so what we're going to do in this file is first, we need a way to actually create a form. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to import a type of form making library from Flask called import Flask form. And from there, I'm also going to import what's known as a string field and a submit field. And so what the string field does, it basically acts as like a string input. So you'll be able to type in whatever you want for like the item, the type and description. And then submit field is what we're going to use to actually press like a submit button to add it to the list. And finally, we're going to import what are known as validators. And we're going to input the data required. So this means that when we're adding an item, it's required for us to actually input something into each of the fields. So like we'd have to put something for item, we'd have to put something for type, and we'd have to put something for description. So now that we have everything imported, we're going to get started by creating a Python class. So the first class we're going to create is called toDoForm. And this is going to extend our Flask form so that we can use Flask form's capabilities. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create variables for each of our three fields. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a string field for item. And we're going to call it item. And we're going to make sure that when we input something that it's going to be required that we actually like input something. So we're going to have the data required. here. We're going to create another one for the type. Do the same thing with the data required. And then finally, we're going to create one for the description. Cool. So now that we're done with that, we also want to add something to actually submit the item. So we're going to add a submit button, which is going to be a submit equals submit field. And we're going to call it add item. So there, we're done with the to-do form. So now we're going to be able to add something to our form. But we also want a way to remove items. So we're going to create another class called delete form, which is also going to extend Flask form so we can use its capabilities. And for this, we really just need one button to remove the last item that you added. So we're just going to call it submit again. And it's going to be another submit field. But this time we're going to say remove last item. Okay, so now we have this, but now we actually need to connect it to our web page so that we can actually use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our main site.py. And from here, we need to import our forms. So we're going to add another import statement where from our .forms.py, we're going to import our to-do form class, and we're also going to import our delete form class. So now that we have those imported, now we can actually use those within our template. So here, something that we're going to need to add is we're going to need to add different methods because how the submit works is that it works as a post request. So because of that, we need to add the different methods that we could possibly use for this. So we're going to just add some basic ones like this. So now that we've done that, we're going to go into our hello method. And from here, we're going to create a new form. And that's going to be called, we're going to create a new form based off of our to-do form. And then we're going to create another form called delete form based off our delete form class. So we're basically creating a new to-do form object and a new delete form object. So now that we've done that, so if we want to add an item, we'd press the submit button. And so basically how that works is that when we press the submit button, it acts as a post request. So we want to check to make sure that we got a post request like this with the if statement. And then based on that, we want to check whether or not we added an item or we deleted an item. So if we get from our request of the form, if we got a submit request and that just happened to be named add item, then because of that, we're going to want to add to our to-do list. So we're going to append to our to-do list the item. We have our item, which will be whatever the item data from our form we got. We're going to append the type, which is the same thing. So we're going to get the form.type.data. And then lastly, we're going to get the description. And the same goes for that. So we'll get the description data from the form. And thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
And otherwise, if we didn't add an item, it means that we must have removed an item. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the to-do list isn't empty. So we're going to call when of to-do list, which is basically the length function. So we're going to check to make sure that the list isn't empty, so that it's not equal to 0. And if it isn't empty, then what we're going to do is from the to-do list, we're just going to pop the last item in our list. And from there, we're almost done, but we need to also pass into our render template our forms. So we're going to pass in form equals form for our to-do form. And then we're also going to pass in the delete form, which is delete form equals delete form. And so now that we're done with that, let's see what happens when we restart the page.
Oh,
Did I do that right? I think. Oh, oops. Say from. Cool. All right. So now if we restart page, and we get our to-do list. But now we actually have to, I believe, put it into our template. So back to you, Paul.
okay, so yeah, right now we don't have a form and a template, so the variable that we pass in actually like pretty useless. So what we have to do instead is we go into the to-do list or template.html and we insert another block here. Let's just call the block form. So this block, we're going to also place it in here, which is right below the body. So now we have the block, and now we can make the form right here. So to do the form, we use the form tag, and the form tag has a method of post, and it basically goes to the handler in the main site that takes in the slash, so the root route. So that's what action is for. So let me end the form. And inside the form, it's actually pretty nice. Like the Flask library handles forms really nicely for us, so you don't need to do much. What we do need to do is we just need to have basically know which types, which part of the form to insert into the HTML. So we have form author here, and then like let's say we just want to insert item field, like which is the text field. So that's where you specify the name of the item, and we insert this label right here. After label, we also want to have a field where you can insert it. So form dot item. So item is the name of the variable in forms.py, and we do item, and that's actually a function. So yeah, repeat for the rest of the fields. So item type. Sorry, be just this, and then we have. Okay, so we have the item type. We also have the description. So form dot. So now we have all the text fields. We can insert the submit button. So this is the one line we need for submit. Now let's try restarting. Okay, now we have 3 fields I can insert. So let's say the item is okay. So Right, Henry, can you like refresh the page? Okay, yeah. Or like add another item to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we add an item, so let's call it get milk and groceries description foods milk, add the item, and so yeah, we get another item in our to-do list.
Yeah. So, because now you can like continually add items. Well, if you want to like remove the item from the to-do list. So in order to do this, remember we defined another form in forms.py. We got insert it right here. So it's also gonna be post since forms don't accept delete methods. And this is just simply going to be delete form dot submit. So delete form is a variable we pass in on main site. So we call the submit button of that, and we'll return the post request from that. So let's see. We render the web page. Let me do it again. Render it. Okay. So you can see there's an extra button at the bottom. Right. So let's try deleting an item. Henry, can you try deleting it? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's how you delete it. Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah. So here we successfully removed our last item, so our to-do list is complete. And because of that, our to-do list is actually complete. So we have shown you how to create like a to-do list via Flask and Jinja. And yeah, Paul, do you have any other thoughts to add?
Yeah, that's pretty good. Do you guys have any questions?
Drink your milk, everybody.
All right, but yeah, because of that, that concludes our dev workshop for Python Web Dev, for front-end development using Flask and Jinja. Next week, Paul and I believe Michael, yeah. They'll be talking about back-end development with Python, and yeah.
All right, that's it for the workshop. Yeah. See you guys.
Yes. So yeah, that's all for today.
Yeah. Thank you, Henry and Paul. I'm gonna hold up. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna unlock so that everyone can unmute and just clap. So thank you, Henry and Paul. Good job.
There was literally one person clapping. All right, fine, and Nishan.
I clapped too. Yeah, so if you guys are interested in watching this again, the recordings are in acmr.com/hack. And yeah, tune in next week for more web dev with Python. Thanks, y'all.
You would put music.
Music. Groovybot.
Siri just told me you're welcome.
Welcome.
I was like, wait, what?